Abraham Bram Stoker was an Irish author who looked suspiciously like Abraham from The Walking Dead. I mean, come on. But besides the point, Bram was born in 1847 and died in 1912. He was also the personal assistant of one Henry Irving and a business manager. He was educated at the Trinity College in Dublin for 6 years. His most popular work was Dracula, but his other works include Lair of the White Worm, The Jewel of Seven Stairs, Dracula's Guest, Snake's Pass, etc., etc. Basically, he wrote a lot of Gothic literature and romance because, those go together. So basically, I guess it kind of went like this.
Maybe I should write some scary Gothic literature pieces, but also with a sense of repressed sexual desires and romance. Those go together, right?
But all in all, it worked great together because he wrote great and famous novels. Theme. The theme of the novel is that sin transforms saints into sinners. The author is trying to convey that even the most religious or pure person can be tempted and transformed by sin. Some examples of this is when Jonathan meets the vampire brides.
Spooky girls.
He was heavily tempted by the women and wanted to be bitten, which of course is a symbol for having sex. Sex before marriage at the time was very frowned upon. This temptation almost cost Jonathan his pure status as a character.
And also his life.
Or maybe just his neck. Lucy is another example. Before she is bitten, or before she sins, she is proper and the perfect example of a Victorian woman. After she is bitten,
a symbol for sin or sexual desire.
After that, she not only becomes much more flirtatious, she also murders children, and neither of these things can really be considered pure. Characterization in Dracula. Here we have 6 drawings to show how characters can be interpreted differently. I may think of Mina like this and others like this. We also have Lucy. I think of Lucy like this and other people think of Lucy like this. Jonathan. In this drawing, he is holding a pot with a flower in it. It is garlic, and holding it represents how he was so willing to help defeat Dracula. He is pale because of all the trauma he endured, and anxieties for Mina's friend Lucy makes him sickly. But not as sickly as Lucy, of course. In Stoker's Dracula, Jonathan was ambitious and determined, but almost always when the symbol dust was present. Mina. Mina in the beginning of the book has light blonde hair and looks almost childlike. Here she is drawn with darker hair because later in the novel, Stoker describes her losing her innocence and her hair color darkens. She's drawn in a classic Victorian dress because of the time period in Dracula. Mina is described as a classic Victorian woman who loves and cares about her friends and family dearly. She flees to Jonathan when she hears that he is sick and stays with him until he is very well. When Van Helsing suggests that Lucy is a vampire, she goes with the rest of the gang to investigate and take down Dracula. Lucy. As you can tell by her dress, is much more outgoing than Mina. She isn't afraid to socialize, and her big and fluffy dress expresses this. Her hat also symbolizes this because of its flamboyancy and bright colors. Her pale skin represents her illness, and the black background could be interpreted as a symbol of death, because in modern times we associate black with death. And in the novel, Lucy is described as sweet and just like Mina, cares about her friends and family dearly. But as the book progresses, she becomes more irritable and seemingly hateful towards them. When Helsing's gang goes to the cemetery to kill her for good, she tries to seduce Arthur, something that hadn't been mentioned she had done before. From this, we can say that a vampire's bite changes your personality. Dracula, drawn here as a sort of stereotypical interpretation, was described as having a long face, a domed forehead, hair growing in a slicked back style, very big eyebrows, a bushy mustache, a cruel-looking mouth, and very sharp teeth. While Jonathan is staying at Castle Dracula, Dracula is very civil and polite, but still makes Jonathan uneasy. Dracula likes keeping things in order and under secrecy. He orders Jonathan to write ahead of time to his family and friends, telling them that he is well, and locks Jonathan in his room or out of rooms several times. Dracula sleeps in an underground room in a casket surrounded by dirt. Whenever he feasts on humans, his age decreases and his appearance complies. His clothing shows the typical creepy, spooky clothing an outcast would wear in Romania, or more specifically Transylvania at the time. Dust. Dust symbolizes calmness and bravery and is most prominent during Jonathan Harker's stay at Castle Dracula. It grants him peace, bravery, and the ability to fall asleep almost anywhere.
Even in windowsills and moth-eaten couches.
Yes, even those places. And when all things go completely wrong, Like when Jonathan gets trapped in Dracula's room with him, he stays calm and bravely finds his way out of the situation. So basically, it makes him calm and brings out his inner bravery, which would go something like this, I suppose.
Wow, I feel so calm and brave. I can do this now.
Sleepwalking and sleep. Sleep is a bit of a complicated symbol. People in the novel seem to get bitten a lot more in their sleep.
This is why Dracula warns Jonathan not to sleep anywhere in the castle except his bedroom.
Yes, because of the spooky girls he encounters in the dusty room. Everyone is more vulnerable when they sleep, not only because they can't physically fight back as much, but because the novel suggests that everyone has a secret desire to be bitten, not because they want to become blood-sucking monsters or anything, but because being bitten symbolizes a repressed sexual desire. The novel was set in Victorian England, which is pretty much the most repressed era in known history, so when you're asleep or half asleep, the desires are easier to come out and easier to see. An example should be the three blood-sucking women Jonathan runs into. He, in a way, wants to be bitten by them in his half-asleep state, and these women represent his repressed sexual desires. Lastly, blood is obviously a crucial symbol in a vampire book. Blood represents, as the asylum patient Renfield explains, life. As Dracula drinks Lucy's blood, he gets stronger and she gets weaker, so he gains life and she loses life. Drinking blood is kind of like a transfer of life from one being to another. Gothic aspects of Dracula. Gothic literature has really no set definition, but pretty much it's a style of literature that involves gloomy settings, grotesque, mysterious, violent, and or supernatural events, and usually has an aspect of decay. It's a kind of horror writing. But Gothic, in contrast to horror, is supposed to have a sense of beauty in it, whereas horror is just supposed to invoke fear. The first example of Gothic literature in Dracula is The Castle. It's a gloomy and dark setting which adds to the Gothicness of the novel.
Is that a real word?
Isolation. Jonathan is isolated from everything during his stay at the castle, even describing himself as a prisoner. Helplessness also goes into making it a Gothic piece of writing. For example, Lucy is helpless to her habit of sleepwalking and being bitten and transformed into a vampire. Mystery and suspense also have a play in why it is a piece of Gothic literature. Suspense comes into play when the characters are trying to defeat Dracula, and mystery comes into play where the characters try to figure out why Lucy is sick.
Also before they figure out what Dracula is.
Yes, the mystery being why he does the strange things he does. There's also an obvious element of supernatural in the story, Dracula being a vampire.
And the spooky girls.
Yes. Historical context in relation to Dracula. Ever wondered why Dracula happened how it did?
Absolutely.
Well, during this time period, many people thought that the dead were rising and coming back to life and killing people. Dracula is based off of Vlad Dracula, who at the time was the prince of, Achaia, Romania in the 1400s, and was widely rumored to be a bloodsucker. Dracula was published in 1897 at the height of the British expansion and was also the start of their decline of power. It was written and published during Queen Victoria's reign. Psychology was first being studied. Dr. Seward and Van Helsing both studied this new field.
Well, Van Helsing dabbles more in the field, as well as everything else.
Yeah, basically. It was also a very repressed era sexually, and sexuality was not acceptable in society, and everyone was expected to act very modest and pretty much conservative all the time. And the Victorian era started the Gothicism literacy, so did the belief that the dead could communicate with the living. And that is why Dracula happened how it was, because of the time period. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde versus Dracula. In both novels, there are subtle focuses on the scientific advancements of the Victorian era. In The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the characters are focused on how their mind fluctuates between Hyde and Jekyll. This was indicating the birth of psychology. In Dracula, the birth of psychology was shown through Dracula and the other vampires' minds. Another advancement that Dracula indicated was blood transfusion research. Dracula would suck people's blood, which not only represented repressed sexual desires, but also the perfecting of blood transfusions. In The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the main character, Dr. Jekyll, is a scientist trying to repress his alter ego using potions or medicines. These relate because both are researching to perfect a process to better humankind. The plots of the two novels are similar because in The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the characters want to rid of the evil, Mr. Hyde, because he's causing problems for society. killing people and doing things the general public don't like trampling little girls. In Dracula, the characters want to rid Dracula because he is also causing problems for society, killing people, children, and turning people into vampires. In both novels, the antagonist is causing harm in society, and the protagonists want to help society get rid of them.
Monster theory. Jeffrey Cohen's monster theory has multiple connections to Dracula. In fact, connections can be found in all 7 theses, either in the book's contents or in historical context to the book. Thesis 1 is about how monsters are metaphorical ideas. The idea of the novel, the idea of this blood-sucking monster.
Hey.
No. The idea of a bloodsucker probably came from Britain's fear at the time. Fear of sexuality and immigrants. Sexuality because it's a symbol for bloodsucking, and immigrants because Dracula moves around a lot and leaves necks, wounds, and dead children everywhere he goes.
Thesis 2 states that monsters change as a culture changes. This relates to how Van Helsing's vampire hunting gang becomes smarter and smarter, but as they do, Dracula does as well. Thesis 3 states you can't categorize a monster. This relates because Dracula can represent many of Britain/Stoker's fears.
Thesis 4 is about how the monsters at the gates of difference for relatability. Dracula bloodsucking is a symbol for repressed sexual desires, as other characters and real-life people in the Victorian era would also feel. Thesis 5 is about how the monster helps keep society in check, so to speak. This relates to the novel because Dracula furthers Britain's thoughts at the time that immigrants were bad things. Thesis 6 is about how people are envious if the monster can do things they cannot. For Dracula, it's bloodsucking, which obviously represents repressed sexuality. Characters all have a secret desire to be bitten or to express their sexuality, and they are all jealous that Dracula can get away with doing these things.
Also, Renfield feels jealous that he is considered crazy, but Dracula is not.
Yes, also Thesis 7 states that society is the monster because society creates the monster. And although Dracula is literally a blood-sucking monster, Britain at the time made society make immigrants and sexuality out to be bad and horrible things, also
Or monsters.
called monsters.